guys, welcome to the final season, the best and the brightest final season of AP Euro Review with Miss Clark. This is part 4, whoop, 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 and this is going from World War I until modern day Europe. So that's going to encompass World War I, World War II, the Cold War, all the wars basically. So we kind of left off in our last video about the causes that led to World War I, and we said that that was mania. M stands for militarism, the A stands for alliances, the N stands for nationalism, the I stands for imperialism, and the A, that last one, is the spark that sets off the bomb, which is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And so once the war starts, we have on one side, on one end of the ring, we have the Allies, Russia, Great Britain, France, and then later on the United States. And on the other side of the ring, we have the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. And so Germany starts off this war with this thing called the Schlieffen Plan. And the Schlieffen Plan is basically where Germany decides to go through Belgium and attack Paris through Belgium that way. However, this is not successful. It ends up getting stuck in a stagnant war, and that's where pretty much the entirety of World War I is fought, on the Western Front. When we're talking about that Western Front, it's definitely going to be trench warfare, where they're just sitting in trenches, not really making any moves, too afraid to really go over the no man's land. However, there is a lot of new technology that's going to signify that World War I is going to be the first modern war. It's going to be machine guns, poisonous gas like mustard gas, which is now illegal as a war crime, submarines, barbed wire, mass artillery, tanks, we have airplanes. We're now coming into what we would recognize as modern war. Now there's two really important battles that we should remember when we're talking about World War I on the Western Front, and that's the Battle of the Somme, which was going to be the bloodiest battle in all of World War I history, and then the Battle of Verdun, which is basically when it kind of slowed down into a stalemate, and where we stay in a stalemate until America joins the World War I effort in 1917. And so on the Eastern Front with the Russians, they at first are not really doing super hot. The commander of the Western Front, his name is Paul von Hindenburg, which, remember his name, because he definitely comes up later with your good old friend Hitler. And he is doing great. He is pushing really deep into Russia. He is taking over Poland. He takes over the Balkans. The United Kingdom tries to set up a plan to retake the Balkans, and it ends up failing, and that is called the Gallipoli campaign. This is the time period when Russia is being run by the Tsar Nicholas II, Anastasia's dad. And if we know anything about Russian history, he was not a very successful, didn't really listen very well. If you want to know more about him, that is in my next video on the Russian Revolution. In 1917, the Russian Revolution happens, and the communists take over, and the Russians decide to withdraw their troops in and they are doing it because of the whole Bolshevik Revolution. And that, at the same time period, is when the United States decides to get involved in the war. And there's a couple of different reasons why the United States gets involved in a war. For up until this point, we were neutral. We didn't really want to be involved in it so much, except for economically, maybe. Especially Woodrow Wilson is the president at the time, and he is very, very anti-war, does not want any part of it. But there's going to be three major reasons why the United States felt the need to get involved in the war. One, the Lusitania is a big steamship, and it had Americans on board, and the Germans thought that it might be carrying weapons, and so they blew up the Lusitania and killed several Americans who were on board. And it's sort of like, if we were thinking about like the Spanish-American War, when we thought that the Spanish blew up the USS Maine, and that's why we got into the Spanish-American War, it's the same sort of idea, where they blow up a ship, we're really mad about it, we get into a war over it. Also the Vietnam War with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, but that's a whole other thing. They also kind of go into unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany declares that. the reason that they declare that is because the United States never stopped trading with Great Britain. We trade with Great Britain. We have a cultural tie to them. We have a history tie to them. However, the Germans are obviously not going to really like this and say, how can a neutral country still be trading and still be interacting and still truly be neutral? Which, you know, the economic side of it, it really threatens the United States. And the third thing that really pushes this over the edge is that the British intercepts a telegram that comes from Germany to the German consulate in Mexico, basically saying that if the Mexicans agree to help attack the United States from the southern part, that Germany would give them part of the land that they had lost in the Mexican-American War. And so that was kind of that pushing point. Whenever America feels directly threatened, like in Pearl Harbor, America will jump into the war, and that is that final push. American troops, American money especially coming and pouring in is going to end the war. It ends the war with that peace conference, and the big three are going to be meeting. So technically the war ends in 1918, but the peace conference is in 1919. And the big three are going to be meeting. The allies are going to be meeting Great Britain, France, and the United States. So that means that Germany's not there, Austria-Hungary isn't there, and Russia is not there as well, because Russia was gone. And they signed this thing called the Treaty of Versailles. President Wilson came in with his 14 points, which called for basically a peace agreement. However, France and Great Britain had this idea that they really, really wanted to punish Germany. They were totally wrecked from the Great War, and they wanted to punish Germany not only physically, but as far as limiting their military, limiting their navy, and having them pay tons of reparation payments that ends up totally economically ruining, and as far as morale, totally ruining Germany. And that is what the thing ends up getting signed. The only good thing that really comes out of it is the League of Nations, which is basically like the United Nations today. However, the United States does not join, even though it's Wilson's idea, because Congress does not want to join and have to jump into any other world conflict without necessarily having a stake in it. And that's why we do not join the League of Nations. And as we well know, the Treaty of Versailles is super important to understanding why we got into World War II.